peaceful and beautiful and physical and angry all at the same time.
Were you idiot, your mind would cave in and your heart would explode within your chest.
This is going to be a shame.
Here we go!
All right, here we go. Matt Robinson with you, as always, as we kick off another edition of the Tall Can Audio Podcast. Still out of town, but wanted to check in anyway. We got a good show today. Our buddy Nick Ashbourne from Sportsnet is going to join us, also from the Blue Jays Happy Hour Podcast, the Maple Leafs Hot Stove Podcast. Lots to cover with him. We'll talk to him in just a minute. And then after that, stick around. Often the guest is the whole thing, but I want to do this in order that it happened. So I did record with Nick at about 12:30 on Tuesday afternoon, and then a little after that we saw the Canada-USA women's hockey game, and I'll have some comments on that as well after we finish up talking to Nick about some baseball, about some NHL, lots to get to there. So stick around for all that. Make sure you're subscribed to the pod wherever you're hearing me, and give us a follow on social media at Tall Can Audio. If you missed it, on Monday afternoon we dropped a new episode with Steve Bunda. Talked some Olympics there, the Super Bowl, little UFC, just the NFL playoffs in general and how they stacked up to previous years. So lots of good stuff up on the feed right now. I would encourage you to go back and check all of that out at tallcanaudio.com or wherever you're hearing us right now. And of course, if you missed it last week as well, Julian McKenzie was here to talk about his new book, Black Aces. It's also up on the feed. So don't miss out on that. But with all that said, let's just get right to it. We'll get into our conversation with Nick Ashbourne right now. Okay, let's bring him in. A guy we haven't talked to, I think, since right around last summer when the Blue Jays were doing their thing, from Sportsnet, the Blue Jays Happy Hour Podcast, and Maple Leaf Hot Stove Podcast. Nick Ashbourne is back. Thanks for doing this, man. How are you?
I'm good. It's always my pleasure being on. I think in some ways I'm one of the, not in terms of the content, I don't want to pat myself on the back, but in terms of the genre, one of the more ideal guests for you, because I feel like I'm covering a lot of your bases.
You do, man. And in so many ways, like we were just talking about that maybe we would not get too deep into the beer, but you're normally a solid spot there too, but certainly then across the Jays and the Leafs. And you align with my sporting interests pretty well. So it's always great when you make a little time for me, man.
Happy to be of service.
Look, I want to talk to you. As much as I want to talk about them at all, I want to talk to you about the Leafs. We'll push that down the road here a little bit. But let's start with baseball, man, because we are here. We have made it. In many ways, it's felt like a short winter because of how late into, I guess they played games in November, the Blue Jays went. But also, it's been a quick winter. It's sort of arrived back on us quickly. I'm sort of curious, in your mind, as we open up spring training here, has this been a successful offseason? And I keep telling myself it has. They've done some nice work. They've addressed some things. But it does feel like one of the things that I can't get out of the back of my mind is there's a lot of room for variance on this team. When you think about, George Springer, and he had sort of looked like that age decline had arrived, and then he had this huge bounce back beer. You can see what's on my mind around here. This huge bounce back year. And then, you've got Nathan Lucas and Ernie Clement who become stars. Can they do that again? And then the offseason you go out and you get an Okamoto and a Cody Ponce, who I really like both of those signings, but there's room for variance there in terms of how their stuff's going to play in the majors. I'm sort of curious, has this been a good offseason in terms of helping you predict what this Blue Jays team is capable of?
It's interesting you mentioned the level of variance, because it's something that I wrote about a few weeks ago about how for a team that is as good as the Jays are, and I think this is a really good team, there are a lot of guys on this roster who performed extremely differently from 2024 to 2025. And not all of them went in the positive direction, right? Like Santander was far worse, and you expect him to be better. Mm-hmm. I think Vladdy was worse in 2025 than 2024, which everyone forgets because he was absolutely lights out in the playoffs.
Sure.
I think you expect him to be better in the regular season as well. So it's not like every single player was
Barrios too, right?
Barrios was better, and you expect some kind of, it's all going to regress in a negative way. But with a lot of these guys, there have been big swings. And so it's a little bit more difficult to pin down where these guys are. I think the argument you would make for the Jays is like some of them are going to end on the positive end of the spectrum, some of them are going to end on the negative, and when you mash it all together, it's going to work out well. We just don't really know what the shape of it's going to be. But I understand for a fan base that just saw this team make a remarkable run, that level of uncertainty isn't particularly comforting. And if they hadn't been on this run in the World Series, like let's say that they had lost in the ALCS or something like that, I think you'd look at what they did in the offseason and you say, look, the pitching was the issue. Cease is he's going to be a foundational guy for the rotation for years to come. Ponce is an interesting bet. Tyler Rogers is as sure a thing as you can get in the bullpen, even though he does it in a weird way. And Okamoto's a really interesting bat too. Like that would be a good offseason. You would really like that. Where things get a little bit dicier is that this offseason it really felt like the money tap was flowing.
Yeah.
And that they could have made something even better happen. And I feel like what the team is trying to do is elevate into that Dodgers tier of, year in, year out, this is a contender. We've got the money to throw around. The farm system has not been as successful as, say, Los Angeles is in terms of the way it's ranked in public, but they're making strides on that side. And so you have all this momentum and you have the financial resources. There's no reason why the Jays shouldn't always be competitive, and they could have used that World Series as a bit of a launching pad to get towards that zone. And I think where they've ended up is this is a very good ball club, but it is still in the same stratosphere as the other good ball clubs around it. And that doesn't mean, they could very easily win the AL East. They probably should make the playoffs, but they are not really in a different tier as the Yankees, as arguably the Red Sox. Even the Orioles are a little bit sneaky in terms of how some of their young players could bounce back. So they didn't distance themselves from the field. But I think when you look at the moves and what they did individually, you like most of what happened. There just feels like a bit of a missed opportunity.
For sure. And your point there that this was the moment that there was all that excitement. People were seeing the Jays in the World Series and seeing what the crowd reactions were like to really be able to attract people. Obviously, the money is always going to be the biggest thing, but there was a moment there. I'm sort of curious, and maybe it's an unfair question, Nick, but because nobody knows exactly how an offseason is going to play out, but when you sat back, did you sort of, there was pie in the sky moments where as fans, we were like, get both. Go get Bo and go get Kyle Tucker. And I don't know how realistic that ever was, but I think a lot of us at least felt like, well, they'll probably get one. You will come out of the offseason with at least one of those guys in your lineup. And when that didn't happen, it's hard to be disappointed with this offseason, as I mentioned, when they did do some solid work. But you do sort of feel like, there was that one thing left on the table again. Did you kind of feel like the rest of us that the odds were they would at least end up with one of them, or were you able to zoom out a little further than that and just say there's no way of knowing?
It's interesting because that's the framing that I heard a lot was they're going to get one of these guys. Can they possibly get two? I think that would have been pretty unrealistic. I know that there were occasions when insiders would float that idea, but that never seemed realistic to me. The way I looked at it was more about, it was very centered on Kyle Tucker. I thought they believed that Tucker was the better fit, kind of, both short, medium, long term. He's the left-handed bat that goes with Vladdy. There's uncertainty in the outfield going forward. He seemed like the guy for them to get, and it always seemed unlikely to me that Bo was going to return. And that has nothing to do with Bo hates the city or Bo hates the fans or Bo has a poisonous relationship with the organization. I know that a couple things were said later on. I think Whit Merrifield said some fairly cryptic things about it. I don't genuinely believe that that couldn't happen. But I also think that he is not necessarily the type of player that this front office is in love with. There is, we talked about uncertainty. There's uncertainty in his game, how he's going to age. This is a front office that really prioritizes defense. He's not a plus defensive player. They also, when they got Andres Jimenez, I think I said this on Blue Jays Happy Hour. Like, you're not going to hear anybody say this because no one wants to say Bo is gone right now. But I felt like from the very start, the Jimenez shortstop thing was at the very least a contingency plan and possibly even plan A, considering what his contract was going to be. So I never really
had to know
believed
Bo
that
was going to feel that too, right? Like, for all the things we've heard about Bo, and maybe some of it's unfair because he's maybe just not a media guy, and that's fine. But like, I wondered how he would feel about being, the secondary target after Vlad. Okay, we took care of Vlad, and now we'll come get to you. And then, okay, when they had to circle back on Bo after missing out on Kyle Tucker, I did wonder a little bit how many of those types of ego blows he would be willing to take, and maybe that's unfair. We don't know Bo, but it, some of the things you hear and read, it made me wonder if he was going to be okay with that, right?
Yeah, I could see that. These guys are human. There's an ego side of that. I remember
he sees himself as the tag team. I want to win with Vlad. He came up with Vlad, and now it's Vlad and then me. Like, I don't know.
I remember I interviewed Bo Bichette at spring training before he was a big leaguer ages ago. And I wasn't it was an on-camera interview, and I wasn't very experienced at those kind of interviews, and I think I was kind of nervous. And this interview no longer exists because Yahoo Sports Canada got erased from YouTube, which is maybe a good thing for me. I don't know. But one of the first questions I asked him was something like I was trying to ask him about, like Vlad's shadow, and I just put it really the wrong way.
Okay.
And I made it something about him just being like second. I didn't use the term second banana. I wasn't that stupid, but it was something like, and I just like saw in his eyes, I was like, oh God, like I'm not getting anything good for the rest of this interview. Like I've already fucked up the first question. So like, I don't think that he's someone who's like, I need to be the superstar on a team, and that's what made this happen. Where he went, the Mets have plenty of superstars. Sure. But I do think that the element of him not being prioritized perhaps had something to do with it. Another thing that's important to remember here is that both the contracts that got signed, the Tucker contract and the Bo contract, they were in a pretty different structure than we've really seen before. And I think the Jays came into the offseason, look what they did with Dylan Cease. Like that is a very conventional contract. We are going to let you maximize dollars by stretching this term out. That's what they wanted to do with Kyle Tucker. Potentially, we don't really know. We haven't heard much about what exactly, if there was ever even an offer out to Bo, but they probably didn't think that they were going to be in this market where they had these short-term deals with Tucker and with Bichette, where the team, I would argue, can't even really win. Like from a pure efficiency standpoint, if you want to do wins above replacement against dollars, like the team is not going to be able to spend money efficiently on that contract. Like Tucker has never been worth what he's going to be paid in any season, and he's only going to be getting older. I would argue Bichette's probably never quite been worth what he's going to be paid going forward for the Mets. I think the Jays are more willing to do the contract where we expect to win at the beginning of the deal. We expect you to win at the end of the deal, and we'll see how it nets out when it's all said and done. But like that's kind of the long-term contract dance that you normally do with these elite players. And that's probably the way they're conceiving of it. And as much as the Jays have money, they are still owned by a publicly traded company. And so it's harder for them to do contracts, I think, that are sort of objectively stupid in a sense, even if like, having Tucker is great, having Bichette is great. These teams are trying to win the World Series, but there is an element of the Jays where they are not run by some, 80-year-old billionaire who doesn't care. Like, the old Illich thing with the Tigers way back in the day, like that kind of stereotype. That's not how the Jays are run. Like they are run, quote unquote, sensibly. And I think that made it more difficult for them to wade into those waters.
So it's interesting. You made a point here a moment or two ago about, worrying about Bo's defense, and certainly that's legitimate. We've seen that play out. Also, his legs long term, his sprint speed has never been elite, and now he's had a couple injuries getting older. But I'm curious, I sort of felt like maybe this idea that the Blue Jays front office is so defense-centric has started to fade away a little bit. And I look at what they're going to run out there at this, like we don't really know what Okamoto is going to look like at third. Certainly Santander is going to have to spend some time in the outfield now. I doubt they really want Springer to be back out there after how successful he was at DH last year. Barger, again, not elite defensively in the outfield. Is that an element of the Jays' personality that you think they've learned from and are now moving away from? Or is it just the circumstances that have put them here where clearly defense, being elite defensively is not going to be, the be-all, end-all anymore? I'm sort of curious just where you're at with that being part of their MO or the reputation of this group.
It's interesting because everything you just said there was true. On the flip side, I'd say, they're about to run out Varsho, Clement, and Jimenez and Kirk up the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Like the spine of that defense is going to be all elite defensive players who give you more defensive value than offensive value. I know Varsho's had his moments where he's had like a run as an elite power bat, but I don't think that's fair to expect. I think what's really at play here is that George Springer has kind of surprised them. Like, I'm not sure if they thought George Springer would even be a player on the roster for 2026. Like the way he was playing by 20. So like when they signed Santander, the expectation was that this guy's going to be the long-term DH. Like he is, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Like he's a bad outfielder. He is one of the slowest guys you can have running around out there. Like they're not idiots. They signed him into his 30s on a long-term deal. They desperately need the power. They're willing to do that. I think they probably anticipated that in 2025 even, you might see a decent amount of Springer in the outfield because you'd seen that in the past. And you'd have Santander at DH a ton. And then Springer is so successful at DH that you're forced to run Santander out there, and that really changes things. Like the Okamoto one is interesting. I think that's where some of this kind of hinges, because if Okamoto ends up being a legitimately poor defensive third baseman, that really does change things a little bit. And he is someone who, again, I've not crunched the film of what he did in Japan, so I'm not claiming to be an expert. I think it's interesting to see what happens. I don't know what will happen. But he is someone who is listed as a first baseman / third baseman through all of free agency. And like when you're a great third baseman, people don't tend to mention that
there's
you're
no slash.
A first baseman as well.
No, and this is it. I don't know how this is all going to sort of shake loose, and it sort of brings us to spring training. And we've been trained for so long and told repeatedly, like, don't read too much into spring training. Guys are working on things and just, working through, and it's just a slog for a month and a half or 5 or 6 weeks, whatever it's going to be. So, try not to pay too much attention to any. And yet, it does feel like, okay, there is a lot for the Blue Jays to look at this year. I do want to see how Santander looks in the outfield. I do want to see what Okamoto looks like at third. Is Bieber throwing the way he is? Is this a year where it's fair to assess things a little more closely that the Jays are doing at spring training, or is it still going to be important to just none of it matters until opening day, try not to get too wrapped up in it?
If you have to lean one way or the other, I think that it's probably safer to lean in the none of it matters area. But, as someone who's going to be making plenty of Jays content between now and then, you got to pay close attention. Honestly, it's really just, it's so case by case, right? Like there's almost nothing that, Vladdy can show me that's going to make me feel any differently about how he's going to perform. Or, even, an Alejandro Kirk, some of these players that are extremely well established, like Kevin Gausman. With all the pitchers, I guess you can always be velocity watching. You can be watching if they add extra pitches. Sometimes that's interesting. Savage is someone I'm interested in. Like, is he ever going to add a pitch that actually goes to the glove side, or is everything going to fade? Like, he has a weird profile, and he's a young guy who's at that stage where he might be thinking to add. But, you mentioned Okamoto there. Like, I think it'll be very intriguing to see how he looks defensively at third, because most of us are not super familiar with that. There are certain players worth zooming in on. You mentioned Bieber as well. Like, does Bieber look healthy? Is the velocity there? Does the command look okay? There are individual guys that have something to not necessarily prove, because most of the roster spots are relatively tight at this point, but that can change. Like 1 or 2 injuries happen, and suddenly instead of having a roster that feels set, you have some serious battles going on as well. So I don't think it's going to be the most fascinating spring training you've ever seen, because most of these guys are relatively well-established veterans who by and large have their jobs dialed in. And to be honest, that's what you get with a contending team that just made the World Series.
There's been a lot of talk about Jose Barrios, and the year that he had last year, and then he ends up on the IL for the first time, and then he gets told he's not going to be in the on the playoff roster, and then he's not around in the World Series. Now, the Blue Jays did approve that, and I think it was still sort of couched in the health thing, but it's not like he just vanished. And I do wonder what the relationship is like there, what to expect out of him, and honestly, maybe the best question I can ask is, are you surprised he's still here?
He is in a bit of an odd situation because what makes Barrios most valuable at this point of his career, and it's weird to say that, right? Because there are some significantly older players who you don't think are over the hill. Barrios is only 31 years old as we have this conversation. I'm talking about at this point in his career. But what he's done best in the last little bit has just been, showing up, being durable, making those 30 plus starts. And that is worth a lot, but it's also not maybe worth as much as you think when you also have Gausman and Cease and Bieber and Savage and Ponce. And so I can see them keeping him around, through spring training, because if you have an injury, like, he is a better option to step in than, generally speaking, you're going to find.
And while all the alarm bells were ringing on him last year saying there's problems here, he still finished with a 4.17 ERA, which is slightly better than average. Like, he was still capable to some degree.
Yeah, he's not a totally useless pitcher.
Right.
I think that the reality is that running a 6-man rotation doesn't make a ton of sense over the long term. Having Ponce as a swingman doesn't make that much sense considering what you've invested in him. And so, yeah, maybe keeping him through spring is the logical thing to do because there's a decent chance that somebody gets injured and then you'll be happy that you have him. Or
somebody gets injured on another roster and you now have a trade piece that maybe can get you something.
For sure. And not a super valuable trade piece considering what his contract is. But we just talked to the Blue Jays and the amount of financial weight they have to throw around. Like, that's another thing you can do with financial weight. It's not a very sexy use of financial muscle is to pay off your current bad contracts to move them to other teams, but it is something you can do. So he's a difficult guy to move because of the contract and because I don't think other teams are super excited about him. And the kind of team that needs a veteran starter to just fill innings is usually not the kind of team that's looking to win now. And so, most teams that are really looking to be competitive and add veterans kind of feel like they have a decent option there, or one that they're at least has more upside. So he's just an odd player in an odd situation, but I'm inclined to believe that he has more value to another team unless somebody gets hurt in spring training, and that would be the wise thing to do, would be to facilitate an exit. Not because he's totally useless, but just because you don't want to run a 6-man rotation. People talk about it all the time. Teams do it for, a month or 6 weeks or something. But then it gives you the condensed bullpen, and then you have the one day where the pitcher, your starter gives you 2 innings, and then everyone gets crushed. It's not a good situation. And so I don't even know what to predict with it because he is a tough guy to move. But I will say, in terms of what they should do, they should find a way to give him an exit, because I don't think having him in the current form is super beneficial.
I think there's a lot, like you just said there, in terms of wait out to see what injuries look like and how you come out of spring training. But I can't help but feel a little bit like he and Savage and even Bieber are connected a little bit. Like, if Bieber doesn't look ready to go, or you need to ease him into the season a little bit and he's going to miss a week or two, then maybe, now you need Barrios a little longer. And then the one that kind of stands out to me is Savage. And I'm curious, would you handle him any differently than you would handle some of the rest of your starters? Do you think they might kind of have kid gloves with him? Like, he did do something fairly remarkable last year in terms of the way he shot up through the leagues and the levels. The number of pitches he threw, number of innings he threw were all significantly up. And now you're going to start even earlier. Is that a guy you would consider skipping a start now and then? Would you start him in AAA even I know that would be a tough blow, but to have a little more control over his innings? Do you think he's kind of ripe to be, paired up with somebody and piggyback on someone else for the first little while? Or would you just say, yeah, you're going to be a part of this and we're going to run you out there like anyone else? He's going to be a big piece of your today and your future. He's an interesting case study as well.
Certainly. He had an odd season in 2025. There's just not a lot of players who end up pitching significantly more in the playoffs than they did in the regular season at the major league level. You mentioned all the rungs on the ladder he climbed up. He ended up with just under 140 innings if you smash it all together. In college in 2024, he was at 93. I think there might be in the postseason, he might be even slightly higher than that.
Okay.
I don't think that that's sort of a truly dangerous trajectory. I think that's fairly solid for a college. Again, this is an adult too. I know he's not old, but he's not a high school arm either. An adult pitcher trajectory, I think it's okay. There'll definitely be opportunities. I don't know if it's a skip start, but it just might be a non-competitive game where his performance would warrant him coming out in the 6th inning. But you're just like, he's at 79 pitches through 5, bullpen's relatively rested. Just don't send him out for another one. I think there'll be some element of caution. There'll be some element of not pushing him too far in an individual start or taking opportunities to give him a breather. But I don't think they're going to be too conservative with him because, like I said, last year he pitched a fair amount of innings. This is not a Ricky Tiedemann situation where he's never been healthy and he's never logged a workload that resembles a normal starting pitcher. Like if he gave you, let's say 150 innings, which is not a super uncommon amount for a starting pitcher who is in kind of the middle lower end of your rotation, that would barely be an increase from the previous year. So yeah, do you want to see him pitch 220 innings? I don't think so, but that's just not really the way the game's played anymore.
Let's zoom out and take a look around the division here quickly before we shift gears. And it's tough to, you sort of mentioned this, as we were kicking things off, but the Orioles, I think, surprised people last year with how poor they were. They still have a lot of young pieces that should bounce back, and it's not like they were quiet in the offseason, bringing in Pete Alonso, among others. The Yankees, I think, were quieter than some expected in the offseason, but if nothing else, they're going to get Garrett Cole back at some point here, probably late, somewhere in this season. The Red Sox have been chipping away at it, made another move here in the last week or so for a third baseman, I think, that fits pretty nicely for them. You said the Jays haven't really separated themselves, but if you had to kind of rank these teams or take a look at the division, how do you view it at this point in terms of the hierarchy?
I think that the Jays are in a strong position. I would still, I guess, put them first, but it does feel like the group is pretty bunched up. The Red Sox are intriguing because they have so many, young players who are sort of establishing themselves at the big league level. And so that's the kind of team that has the potential to overperform because the projections are all going to be, somewhat conservative for unproven guys. And they have a few players who could go off, what does a Roman Anthony full season look like? It could be superstar level. And that's not what the projections are going to show at this point. Obviously, Garrett Crochet and then bringing in Suarez and Sonny Gray makes for a pretty strong rotation. To be honest, that team might be the one that scares me most. The Yankees, they've got Judge and they've got, like you said, they've got Cole will be back at a certain point, Max Fried. That feels like a bit of a top-heavy roster, which, it's undoubtedly worked for them in the past, but you're talking top-heavy and you're talking a little bit older with some of the key players. So that one, again, I'm not quite on the Buck Martinez, the Yankees aren't a good baseball team level, but they don't feel like they have quite as much upside as the Red Sox. I think the Red Sox are the team that scare me the most. And then, the Orioles just didn't quite get the pitching, right? A lot of people kind of figured that Framber Valdez was going to end up falling into their lap. Mm-hmm. And if that had happened, I'd feel pretty differently about where that team sat. It is not going to be a fun lineup to pitch to. I think these guys are going to really score some runs, and there might be some pretty fun games with the Orioles. But when I look at their rotation, I just struggle to think how they're going to fill those innings. And they bolstered the back end of the bullpen, and sometimes that's enough to help you patch things up when the rotation isn't remarkable. But I have them a half step down from the others because, I don't know if one from Valdez would have done it all, but it certainly feels like they're at least one starter short, probably two.
All right, let's talk about the other team, Nick. Look, I've been listening to you guys. I've said the podcast you do there for Maple Leaf Hot Stove is one of the smarter and more interesting listens. I actually kind of complain about it from time to time for how huge the Leaf fan base is, how few quality pods there are. We'll link to yours in the show notes. I highly recommend it to any Leaf fans out there. But you guys have been kicking this around for a couple of weeks now, what the approach should be for the Leafs. And of course, they have to do everything possible to muddy the waters and muddy the conversation before leaving for the Olympics. And just when they have that horrible homestand that basically convinced anyone who was left hanging on that there was a chance this season that, no, this isn't the year, whether you're sell it all or tinker or whatever, this isn't the year to go all in. And then they go and rip off 3 in a row and get back to at least within borderline striking distance of the playoffs as everyone headed off to the Olympics. So I'm just sort of curious now, did that little winning streak do anything to change your position on where the Leafs are at and what they should be doing here headed towards the deadline?
I mean, I don't know if this is sad to report or not. I guess it depends on what your position is. It did absolutely nothing for me. They went out there, and I'm not saying that they, didn't perform well in any of those individual games or anything like that, but the Oilers win, I suppose, is somewhat impressive, and they should feel good about that in the sense that it's their job to win a game, and that's a credible opponent. So fair enough, tip the cap. But the other team is the Flames and Canucks are not good teams. And now they have, with a little bit of a winning streak,
hardly dummied them. Like that Calgary game is just all willy, right?
Not.
Like
their loss to the Kraken might have been their best game in that whole road trip in terms of controlling the play and looking like the team that can win sustainably. Which to be honest, even when they've won, they haven't really been there. So my opinion hasn't changed. I think what you have to think about is, has the opinion of people making the decisions changed? And that is a little bit more ambiguous. There's still quite a few games before the trade deadline. And so I think that if they are right there, then that could certainly change how they approach it. But it shouldn't, because this team, even if they climb into the playoffs barely, it is just not a team that's going anywhere. It's a team that is mediocre in all the underlying numbers. Mediocre is being generous. And they've got a couple of really high-end talents. Like, this is not news to anyone. They have a couple of really high-end talents in Matthews and Nylander who can steal games. They've got a couple of talented goaltenders who can occasionally steal a game for you. But that's what they have to do against good teams, is steal games, because the quality isn't there, especially on the blue line. And I think if you're trying to make the case for this team before the season, when you talked about, the top end talents have to be there to kind of elevate them, minus Marner, you kind of thought, okay, well, maybe Matthew Nyes is taking a next step. And, you're hoping to see more from Tavares than you've seen, especially in the last, let's call it 2 months or whatever.
Nobody needed this Olympic break more than that guy.
Well, except
maybe
both
Matthew
of those,
Nyes. Yes, yeah.
Both of those two, right? And maybe those two come out, and that really kind of makes you think, okay, the top of the roster is really making things happen. But at the end of the day, as you said, this is not their year. It isn't their year. So they have not really been in this position of selling in a long time. And as a result, their cupboards are pretty bare. They just don't have assets. They don't have draft picks. They don't have prospects. This is an opportunity to fix that to some degree, and they need to take that opportunity.
And yet, the guys in charge of doing so, I have no faith in whatsoever. Now, I imagine, and look, I don't think this was ever really on the table, but if they were going to fire their GM at the beginning of the Olympic break to give the new guy time to parachute in and whatever, we'd have heard that by now. It's not happening. Brad Treliving is going to run this trade deadline. And look, my faith in him is pretty limited, but let's say there was a competent GM in place. How deep would you be looking to cut right now? Is it just your UFAs, your McMahons and Laughtons, or would you be willing to go a little deeper than that? Because it gets interesting. If this is just a quick, okay, it's not our year and we want to go at winning again next year, if you trade an OEL, which I'm open to doing, I'm willing to listen and see what you're going to get. You need a replacement for that guy, and this is not a strong free agency class, and now I have to trust that GM again to make trades, and it's a tough spot that they're in right now. I'm curious how deep you'd be looking to cut at the deadline here.
It is a tough position. I think that the good news, if you don't trust Treliving, which I think is absolutely a fair position to take, I would say at my most generous description would be that he's a conventional thinker and not particularly creative.
You know what, Nick? The comparison I used when they hired him, knowing his tie to the Boston Pizza chain, was that he is the Boston Pizza of NHL general managers. Like, if you end up there, it'll probably be a fine meal. Like, you won't walk out hating it, but no one was excited about going to Boston Pizza. It was no one's first choice. It was just the closest to you, and it's minus 20 out and whatever else.
Yeah, I've never been excited about a Boston Pizza meal. I'm afraid to say to the Treliving family. And as you said, I haven't been excited about him as a general manager. Again, it's like, what is he going to do versus what should he do? What he's almost certainly going to do is, like you said, get rid of the unrestricted free agents. And what are you getting for those guys? I think people like to draw this line under the first round picks. Like, can you get a first round pick? Yes, no. And if it's a yes, it's a success. If it's a no, it's a failure. I'm not sure if he's going to get them for any of these guys. I guess McMahon is a candidate. Lawton, I would be shocked if he was able to do that.
There's only one GM paying a first rounder for that guy.
I mean, that's partly because of how the Leafs have used him, right?
Yes.
Like, if all year he had been their third line center and been succeeding in that role, it's a center.
He'd be a guy I'm
league.
interested in a different world where you aren't, scuffling to the deadline and don't need to trade pieces. I'd be interested in keeping him. Why would he want to stay knowing this is the way this coach uses me? Like, I can do better than this.
Absolutely not. Right? And that sucks because, he's from here, and I think he genuinely does seem to like being a Leaf, and they have not treated him particularly well in terms of, especially because he's rewarded them with good play too. It's not like when he first came over, he played really poorly, and that's how he kind of got shoehorned onto the fourth line. Fair enough. Like, if a guy plays like a fourth liner, put him on the fourth line. Hasn't been the case for much of this season, though. He's played much better. He's deserved better. Anyway, we're getting sidetracked here because
I do that.
Scott Laughton's great. I think most Leafs fans agree. Okay, so Laughton, McMahon, I mean, if somehow you can get rid of Yarncroke, sure. I don't think they would be hesitant to get rid of a Benoit or a Stetcher if they, even if there was trivial picks involved, because, Benoit's under contract for next year, but he's not been good. And if anyone thinks that he's worth a mid or late round pick, I would say absolutely. Then, people want to punch Morgan Riley's ticket out of town. I think everyone agrees that would be an off-season endeavor if you could make that happen.
And what you get for that is the salary space. You're not getting much for him.
And part of the salary space.
Yes, that's right.
Not a whole salary space. So we're really talking about a couple players. We're talking about Ekman-Larsson. We're talking about Carlo. We're talking about Nick Waugh. And I guess we're talking about the restricted free agents, Michelli and Robertson. I don't think anyone values Michelli at this point. I have a soft spot for him, but I get that he's not performed up to a level people are targeting him. Robertson's kind of interesting. But I just don't know if his value has actually gone up around the league. They probably should have kept him in the top six and given him more of a run there. He had a little bit of a spark, but probably just hanging on and just being in that Nick Robertson game. So Ekman-Larsson is the one people want to talk about because they think he's actually worth something. And he is. Think about how little his contract is, $3.5 million. Think about how good he's been this season offensively.
And this is likely his high point, his high value point for the rest of the contract.
And that's why I think you have to do it. And like you said, it is difficult to replace a guy like that, especially at anything near what that cap hit is. And you are creating a problem for yourself next season. But the flip side of that is that next season he's going to be 35.
Yep.
And just the chances of him being near this good again seem slim. Maybe he will be. Like, I don't know how he takes care of himself and how the injury luck will play out. But the reason I think you have to ship OEL is because you're in the business of trying to be good again in the near future, but it's unclear how he's going to help you be good in the near future. Like, maybe he will, maybe he won't. The degree to which he will is just up in the air, and what we do know for certain is he can get a good return from today. So you have to make that move as far as I'm concerned. I know not everyone agrees with that, but that's where I'm with OEL. So then we've got Carlo and Waugh. Carlo, it's a low number. He's a big right shot. Sometimes those guys are really valued around the league. We saw the Leafs certainly valued him. It feels like a low ebb to move him. I think if next year is somehow a train wreck, then maybe you think about moving him at that point. But I think he has more to offer than he's shown, and I'd be surprised you're getting a great deal on Carlo, especially if you are moving OEL. If you move both of those guys, and then maybe Morgan Riley, who is even playing defense for you anymore? So I would hold on to Carlo.
Tanev is a question mark.
Yeah, we don't know to what degree Tanev is going to play again.
Yeah,
which is a bit crazy considering much left on his contract, but that's. We knew the risk going in with a player of his age. Nick Waugh's interesting because he hasn't had a great season, but he is, again, the type of player that teams value. I would probably trade Waugh if I thought that there was a chance of bringing back Lawton. I think you have to trade one of those players, but it doesn't seem like you're going to bring back Lawton. And again, we talk about replacing those guys. How hard has it been for them to find legitimate centers beyond the top two? I'm not dying. If someone bowls me over, I don't think it's ludicrous to do it, but I'm not dying to do it. The issue here is that people want more of this retool to start happening this second. They want it to happen now. But a lot of the guys who have a little bit more term to go beyond the McMahons and the Lawtons and make this deadline more exciting for people, a lot of them just don't have a ton of appeal to other teams. And so I think that Waugh and Carlo are kind of the decision points where things could get a little bit interesting. But McMahon and Lawton and OEL are the ones that you kind of have to do.
Yeah, I got to be honest with you, for all the excitement for however long it lasted before it kind of soured after several bad playoff runs, I feel like this window is closed. I think you can extend being competitive. I think they can remain a playoff team if they're smart here. Probably not for this year, obviously, but if you're smart, you can extend out and be a good playoff team here for a little while longer moving forward. But I think the days, I just don't think you have the assets to go out and bring in pieces that are going to make you a contender again in the same window of Matthews and Nylander. It's dark and it's maybe early to say that, but I think this window where we all had dreams of getting a Stanley Cup might be closed here.
I think that's understandable. It's there are real existential questions about okay, let's step back, and are you going to win a Stanley Cup with Matthews and Nylander as the guys? And the answer to that question, and these guys are approaching 30. The answer to that question, has Nylander already turned 30? Anyway, they're getting
right there. Yeah.
So the answer to that question to me is not. It's closer to being a no than a yes, for sure, and by a significant margin. I think the only way for that to become a yes is Matthew Knies becomes a real a star with a capital S player, and you find some kind of big time help on the blue line. And we know how hard, we've been living in Morgan Riley world for a while now. We know how hard it is to find the type of defenseman who's a true needle mover back there. And, I don't know about Knies. I'm willing to give him a bit of a mulligan on his development curve for this season. So I think that's more of a judgment for next year of where his career is going. And, Tavares is probably only going to get worse as much as everyone lauded the contract. He's realistically, a really good team would be thinking about ways to get him onto the wing. But they need him as the 2C at this point. So, I think that in theory, you could get there if other things happen, but the chances of those other things happening are pretty slim. Is this the deadline where you're going to blow all of that up? Those are big decisions.
I'm not doing that yet. I'm not saying that.
Stuff. So
I wouldn't go that far, but I just think short of some really smart moves at this deadline and this offseason, we might get to that point sooner than we think, where we do start to talk about Matthews and Nylander. And
the problem for them too is that their bigger long-term asset, because they don't have draft picks or prospects really, is the cap space. That's in theory what they will have, and we've seen guys are not reaching free agency, even in an expanded cap world. I think people believed, as the cap goes up, players are going to see that there's opportunity out there for them to get that big payday in free agency. And the early returns on that is hockey players just kind of, generally speaking,
it just means
sign
their
where
own
they
teams
are.
have room, and I'm comfortable enough here. I'll just stick around.
Yeah, I mean, a lot can be said about the general, demeanor or attitude of hockey players in terms of their, not wanting to be recognized anywhere, not wanting to play where people care, and just wanting to stay with the teams they're at. I think there's some valid criticisms can be lobbed around, but like that is the reality. And so then the Leafs end up stuck in the same world where it's like you got to retain your own guys because you can't replace them with anyone because no one good is coming available. Except Connor McDavid in a couple of years.
There you go. And he'll be just itching to get into this situation.
Oh, yeah.
Nick, it's always a pleasure, man. I'm curious, the men's hockey tournament about to start up at the Olympics. The women's tournament is heading into the medal rounds. Do you get big into this, or are you someone who kind of not keeps his distance, but is a little more removed from the Olympics? How invested are you about to be here for the next week or two?
I would say I'm fairly invested. I'm especially invested in the hockey. Sometimes I do find it a little bit odd how people are suddenly insanely into skeleton when they haven't, been thinking about it for years and years on end. So sometimes it feels a bit performative. But
I'm fine with people getting invested. I'm less fine with people getting critical. Like, oh no, he turned his hips too soon. We don't know. Come on.
He blew it. Yeah. No. If they crashed, you can say they blew it.
Sure.
If they crash and luge or skiing, you can say they blew it. But anything else, you don't know what you're talking about. There are some sports I find they're really fun to watch. Like I really enjoy the short track speed skating, for instance. Like long track, I'm like, just skip to the last little bit here. But
because
short
you can
track
feel your own quads burning while you watch them. Like it's. No, I'm with you. There's some of these sports that I really, the short track is especially like the relay style ones where there's like way too many people out there and it's just chaos. I can get big into that, and for a couple of weeks you can talk me into curling. Like as long as you're wearing a maple leaf, you'll probably get me to watch it. But I think hockey is the anchor, and especially now with the NHLers back there, I'm on the channel anyway when they say coming up next is the giant slalom. Like, all right, I'll stick around. Like. For 2 weeks, I get oddly invested in all of these crazy-ass sports.
The one I'm all out on, I will say, is like any kind of cross-country skiing or biathlon. I'm so impressed. Honestly, like the amount of endurance required to do that. I've done cross-country skiing once. I really didn't enjoy it. But it's just like, it is a very slow-paced thing to watch. Like, it's more of like, tell me about your great feats of athleticism afterwards, but I don't need to participate in the watching of it.
No, I get that. Look, always appreciate your time, man. You do great work for Sportsnet.ca. Obviously, the Blue Jays Happy Hour podcast, MLHS podcast. We'll link to all of it here in the show notes. But anything in particular you got coming up you want to shout out here? Or?
No, I mean, I think the two podcasts are going to be Blue Jays Happy Hour every single week. We're going to be there for spring training stuff. MLHS, we're on a little bit of an Olympic break, but we'll be back with the Leafs, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of deadline discussion going on. Whichever way it goes, it will definitely be good for content. We'll put it that way.
100%, man. Can't tell you how much I appreciate this, and no doubt I'll come circling around again once the baseball season is underway. But for now, thanks for doing this, man.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
Okay, so there goes Nick. Like I said, we'll link to his stuff at tallcanaudio.com or wherever you're hearing me right now. Highly recommend his work, especially his write-ups on the Blue Jays at sportsnet.ca. Really thoughtful approach to a lot of things that he puts out on that front, and then his podcast work, certainly with our buddy Andrew Stoughton or on the Blue Jays Happy Hour podcast, and with Anthony Petrilli over at Maple Leaf Hot Stove. He's a busy guy, so appreciate his time. Look, I said the next thing we would get into here would be the women's hockey game, and we will in just a second. IKF, I don't really know why he felt the need to do this. But he has signed with the Boston Red Sox. He met with the media on Tuesday, and like I said, I don't get what the upside. I get what the upside was. The cynic in me, but he said and admitted out loud that the Blue Jays preferred to play the Yankees in last year's playoffs over the Boston Red Sox. He thought that was a better matchup for the Blue Jays, and if you remember back. The Yankees and the Red Sox had to play in the American League Wild Card Series, a best 2 out of 3. The Yankees take that and move on to play the Jays in the ALDS. And according to IKF, the Jays preferred that matchup. They wanted the Yankees and they wanted to avoid the Red Sox. And he chalks it up to a meeting in, I guess it was September, he said. I can't remember the exact date, where Garrett Crochet pretty much diced up the Blue Jays lineup. And he does that. Very good pitcher. And I guess that was the impetus. And he said it was a talking point, that the team was all talking about it. And maybe they were. That sounds unusual to me. Most high-end athletes don't really want to pick their opponent. They believe in this kind of the things we would call superstition, that stereotypical athlete stuff. A lot of them actually do buy into that stuff. And so it seems unlikely to me that this was like this really open conversation walking around the clubhouse going, thank God we got the Yankees. We're not going to have to face the Red Sox. Now, does that mean nobody was thinking it? Nobody talked about it? No, I'm sure at some point certain guys did have their preferences or whatever. I don't tend to believe it was as prominent as IKF is painting it, but maybe it was. What do I know? What I do know is that if IKF was still here, if he was still a member of the Blue Jays, he would not have said that out loud. He certainly would not have said it to the media. There's just no benefit. They call it bulletin board material, right? You don't tell the Yankees why they should be more motivated to face you and give them an added reason to want to beat your ass. Now, that playoff series is over. It's not like he came and said it before that series. But the AL East is going to be pretty tight this season, as you just heard Nick talk about. And so there's no real reason to air that kind of stuff that gets said in a clubhouse. And as I said, if he was still here in Toronto, he wouldn't have done it. Because he'd still, want to keep the trust of his former Blue Jays teammates. He wouldn't want to fire up the Yankees to play against a team that he's still on. And the only reason to do it now is to endear yourself, to ingratiate yourself to the Boston fan base and to the Boston media, perhaps more than anybody. And, I'm here now, and man, that Blue Jays team, the one that fucking rolled the Yankees and beat the Mariners and came within a whisker of beating the Dodgers for the World Series. We were pretty scared of you Red Sox, who finished well behind us. We were worried about you guys. Come on. But that's what you say. Oh, I'm so glad to be here in Boston. It's the best fans in the world, and it's a really good team, and this is my best chance to get back to the World. Just stop. Every new player, when they go somewhere new, and it's condescending, it's gross every time. I get why they do it. And if you as a fan, whether it be of the Blue Jays or the Red Sox or any other team in pro sports, needs to hear that from your stars, it's kind of sad because they don't believe it. They might think you're great, but I promise you, when they leave for their next team via trade or via free agency or whatever, they'll think that fan base is great too. It's just what you say. It's PR 101. And in this case, IKF had no qualms about throwing his former Blue Jays teammates under the bus in order to make himself look good in front of Boston fans and media as he makes his, I was going to say debut there, but first media appearances and whatnot. And it's sad that he felt the need to do it, but he's not alone. This is what athletes do. It's lame as hell. And like I said, I don't need it. If you do, then fine. But like I said, he would not have come out on day one at Blue Jays spring training to face the media had he still been here and said, hey, by the way, we were pretty pumped to get the Yankees so we wouldn't have to face those big scary Red Sox. Come on. Quickly, we should touch on the beatdown that just took place by the American women's hockey team over Canada, over at the Olympics. 5-0. And you could make the case, I don't know, I don't want to exaggerate. You could make the case that was flattering for Canada. At the time that the Americans had made it 4-0, Canada still had only 8 shots on goal. It wasn't a good game. And I don't want to overreact for 2 reasons. These are all very small sample size tournaments, and hockey's a crazy game. So, despite having been beat down, It's entirely possible. And perhaps no less possible than like 30%, 35%, that Canada still wins the Olympic gold medal if they face each other again, and they probably will, in the gold medal game. That could happen. It's crazy-ass hockey. Like I've described it 100 times before. People running around on tiny little knives on their feet, slapping at a piece of frozen rubber puck on ice. Things happen. Crazy good goaltending performance, just the Americans off for a day. It could happen. It's not my expectation, though. This game, perhaps a little more lopsided than I would have predicted, but almost to a letter, is what I was worried about when I went on here a couple of times after that roster was announced and said, that scares me. The Americans are bigger and younger and faster than the Canadians, was my problem with it. And I said, you can sustain one, maybe two of those things, but you can't be all three. Like, you can't be smaller, older, and slower than your opponent and expect it to go well. And Canada looked all three of those things in Tuesday's game against the Americans. So I don't know if 5-0 was flattering for Canada, flattering for the Americans, but I know the Americans won that game handily. I'm tired of hearing about the officiating. I'm tired of hearing about Abby Murphy. This is what she does. Would it be nice if the referees knew? Yeah. Did it have anything to do with how today's game played out? No. And when I say the Americans are faster, it's not just that they skate faster. They tore through the Canadians, through the neutral zone, beating people on the rush. Like, they play faster. And yes, they do skate faster, but they also play faster. And I'm getting disingenuous comments in my replies when I talk about this and say that this Canadian team is older. So, well, if you look at the average, there's only like a difference of 2.5 years. And you're like, that is, first of all, huge in hockey. And second of all, you have to understand how averages work. This is pushed out over 20 athletes on each team. So does Canada have some younger players? Yes. Are they as important and pertinent to Canada's success as the Americans are? No. You just watched it on Tuesday. Carolyn Harvey, Layla Edwards, Hannah Bilkey, all of them with 2 points or better. And Edwards and Harvey would be the youngest players on Team Canada. They are leaders for Team USA. And Hannah Bilkey would be the second youngest player on Team Canada. So not only have they done a better job of bringing their young players along, these are not young players that are just along for the ride. These are players there to contribute. And they rolled over Canada today. You know, Alex Carpenter was good. Hillary Knight was good. But they were not the difference makers for the Americans. It was this young wave pushing up from behind. And you can't cover everybody. So would it have made a huge difference if Mika Zandyhart was in this game instead of Joss Larocque, or if Chloe Primerano had come around? I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that in 4 years, these players all have a head start on you again. Because Brienne Jenner won't be there. Nat Spooner won't be there. Joss Larocque won't be there. And who is going to be there for you? Because I can tell you this, while Hillary Knight and Alex Carpenter won't still be there for the Americans, Layla Edwards and Carolyn Harvey and Hannah Bilkey, they will be there. They are contributing members of Team USA right now. They are getting the jitters out of the way, if it looked like at all to you that they had them, with the support of the Carpenters and the Knights and the other veterans on that Team USA squad. Meanwhile, your young core, if you have one, isn't here and isn't getting that protection, isn't getting weaved into the process around your veterans who won't be there in 4 years to shelter these players when they do finally get their chance. This is a poorly constructed team. It was from the get-go. And again, this isn't to say they can't win. But it's going to have to be a 2-1 hold on by the skin of your teeth goaltending win. This Canadian team is not as good as this American team. And you have robbed yourself of the opportunity of having this Canadian team have the same experience as this American team in 4 years when we are looking at a significantly turned over roster. Gina Kingsbury and Troy Ryan, who are running this team, made the conscious decision, we're going to take one more run at this with the old guard. And it sure looked like the old guard didn't have it against the Americans. And if you are sitting there and waiting for me to bring up Marie-Philippe Poulin, you are going to be sorely disappointed. Are they a better team with her? Yes. Are they her away from being as good as these Americans? No. You got sliced and diced today. Possession time, shots on goal, zone time. The speed with which the Americans were breaking out of their own zone and coming through the neutral zone was not going to be overturned by getting just Marie-Philippe Poulin back in the lineup. It's not. So I hope she's back later on. It made sense to hold her out of this. I don't know how serious the injury is. I don't know how likely it is that she'll come back. It sounds like they're optimistic she will play again in this tournament. I certainly understand the logic that this game, while always important when you play the Americans, is not as important as what you're trying to get done over there. So sit her out. You got a game against Finland on the 12th, so that's Thursday. I would imagine she sits that out as well. And then maybe the quarters, depending on your draw. That's 6 days you can get her rest before the semifinals. That'll be against probably the Czechs. I don't know how the Finns are doing. You know, I guess if you fall far enough, you could see the Americans in the semifinal. Seems pretty unlikely and seems pretty undesirable. But I guess it could happen. I don't even know, actually, if it's mathematically still possible. You do have 2 wins already, so maybe it's not. Point being, you can rest Poulin, get her the semifinal to kind of ramp up again, see how she's doing, see what she's capable of, and then have her for the gold medal game. And you want her in that gold medal game, certainly. I'm not telling you this is a complete lost cause, fold up the tent, and go home. I'm telling you it is far more likely than not that the Americans are taking the gold medal this time. You're going to need something big to change over the next 6 or 7 days before that gold medal game. One of those big things can be Marie-Philippe Poulin, but you're going to need a way better game out of Anne-Renee Desbiens in goal, or to go with someone else to start that game. I can't imagine after everything she's done that they will turn away from Desbiens, but she wasn't great. She was not the only one, and she was hung out to dry a couple of times, but that first goal against especially, she's got to have that. So I assume she gets the gold medal game as well, but maybe not. But the frustration everyone is feeling right now, like you can argue with the lines, you can argue about the performance of players today, and it's all got to be better. But some people told you weeks ago this roster was not built properly. Both Troy Ryan and Gina Kingsbury have to be held accountable for that. And Troy Ryan has not exactly wrapped himself in glory since then either. Like, you watched what happened at the rivalry series. Canada got their ass kicked all through the fall. The Americans were beating the tar out of them across North America. And they went, that's fine. We're still going to go with our people and we'll run the old guard back one more time. Well, it sure looks like an extension of the rivalry series right now. And Troy Ryan has made some pretty questionable decisions even since we got here. People don't love the line construction. I don't know what he was doing on the 3-0 goal, challenging for goaltender interference. Like I said, I don't want to hear about officiating, whether it's been good or bad. They had just reviewed the goal to see if it had crossed the line or not. And that review took a long time. You don't think they already had taken a look at whether there was interference? They come out, they tell you, yeah, no, puck crossed the line, good goal. You're like, go look again. Could you look again and see if there's goalie interference? They go and look again, determine again that there's no goalie interference, and by the way, here's a penalty. Now, you didn't end up getting scored on that power play, but you looked pretty dumb. That didn't instill any confidence from anybody, I don't think. There's going to be a massive turnover at the end of this tournament. Whether they win or not, this roster will be incredibly different the next time you see it. certainly by the next Olympics, but probably by the World Championships in 2027. And if this continues to go the way that it looks like it's going to go, Gina Kingsbury and Troy Ryan will not be the ones tasked with putting it together. That was a bad day at the office. This is the first time the Americans have ever shut out Canada at the Olympics. You want to be a part of that? You want to hang your hat on that? Not good for your legacy. Anyway, the Canadian women have one game left on the 12th against Finland. That is the one that is was rescheduled from the first day of the tournament where the Finns were, well, under the weather. So you're going to have that one. The men's tournament underway also here on Wednesday. There's just a couple of games. I think it's Finland, Slovakia, and Sweden, Latvia, I believe. Good chance I watch both of those. Just kind of unique. And frankly, that Finland-Slovakia game should be pretty good. I would imagine that to be a pretty tight one. So we'll see. And then the Canadian men as well back at it on the 12th. So a couple big games for Canadian hockey fans there on Thursday. So that's where we'll wrap this up. Hope you enjoyed that chat with Nick Ashbourne. Hope you tolerated my vent session here on the Canadian women's team. And IKF can, well, shut up. Just shut up, man. Just talk less, okay? I should talk less too. And on that note, we'll end the show. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next time.
I thought it generally sucked. I didn't think it was a specific suck. I thought it was like an all-encompassing type of suck. So, we're going to try and rectify that. But for right now, I'm going to be pretty pissed about it.